Hello and welcome to Off the Track. My name is Peter Russell and today I'm joined by Michael Walker.
Hello.
Ben Galvin.
Howdy.
Jesse Stevens.
Yo.
Matthew Fleming.
Hello.
Corey Crane.
Hi.
George Stoner.
Hi.
And special guests Riley McGlue.
G'day.
And Eleanor Hopkins.
Hello.
Good to have you all here.
I was going to ask, where are Riley and Eleanor from so the listeners know?
Yeah, where are you guys from, Riley?
I am from Perth and I'm on Team Nebula.
And Eleanor?
I'm from the United States, former graphic designer for Team Pinnacle.
Cool. Good to have you all here. Now, in this age of social distancing, we are seeing F1 in schools events move into a more virtual environment. Earlier this week, we saw REA, the competition organisers here in Australia, release a set of provisions for virtual finals to be able to take place. F1 in Schools UK has also said that they will be making plans for virtual nationals to be able to take place later on in this year, and Ireland will be proceeding with their virtual national final later in May. Now, the provisions released by REA state that the underlying regulations have not been altered, but competition documents will be uploaded to Google Drive, which will include a 10-minute video verbal presentation. There will be no live interviews, and instead teams have been asked to pre-record videos that cover the engineering criteria. Pit displays will also be a virtual CAD model, and a video or document must be created instead of an interview. We've also heard this week World Finals that were scheduled to be in Singapore later this year will now no longer take place. So Riley, given that you've had basically 2 seasons of experience and you're going to the World Finals for a second time, what is the experience for you now for preparing for the World Finals compared to this time last year?
Preparing for the World Finals this year is definitely different, as we don't really know how long the time frame we actually have. So what we've been trying to do is just try and get out prepare for as if the finals are going to be in Abu Dhabi later this year, as we've been told that's one of the potentials, and just get it done as we usually would.
And your budget, how has your budget sort of been impacted, and finding sponsors? Have you found it harder to get sponsors?
So as was covered in the Corona Extra episode, it definitely has changed the landscape for getting funding. So yeah, we've just been trying to get our prospectus completed for Worlds, which is interesting because most companies aren't accepting prospectuses at the moment. So what we've had to do instead is make a lot more face-to-face contact, which again is very difficult because of Corona. So
I guess on that point, with one of the challenging things is that it's not just also the face-to-face interviews, it's that if you want to do a good pitch, no one's going to be, that's not an essential thing. People don't have to have you in your office. So I remember Horizon, who did really well with sponsors, they had a really good pitch that was really well planned, and they went into every business they effectively got sponsored by, and that's no longer possible. So I think that really limits the budget even more.
yeah, especially if the World Finals do happen to be in Abu Dhabi later this year. That was especially expensive last year, especially for us Australian teams, and it was a budget of upwards of 60-70 grand. So particularly in this current financial climate, that will be very difficult.
Do we think there's going to be any sort of, innovation in terms of pit displays, given that they're now going to be virtual at the Australian competition at least? Are we going to see anything sort of new or
What do they mean by virtual?
So it's just going to be a CAD model. It's not, teams aren't going to be expected to build it.
So each team has to create a CAD model, and then they produce a video or some kind of way to present it to the judges.
Okay, so one of the thoughts I had immediately when I saw that it said that the type of video is left up to the discretion of the competitors is that we'd see much more creative videos from teams. And so I don't know whether you guys are familiar with the YouTuber Michael Reeves, but he makes all these kind of weird robots, and he does it in a really Casey Neistat style of video. And I think we'll start to see lots of creativity from teams to try and stand out for that kind of thing. And on the booths, I think you'll see, if it moves into a digital environment, that they'll be much more interactive. And I could see teams doing a lot with green screens and visual effects in their video to try and cram as much information that's relevant to the criteria, which is an important thing to consider when you're building a pit display. It's not just looks, it's what matches the criteria. And then doing more things like that.
I think this could have a few functions for the pit display. Firstly, I think it's kind of a bit annoying that they kept the same 2 meter or 3 meter table kind of rough structure.
Yeah.
If you're only having to do this virtually, why not team create a garage for their car, like a proper F1 pit? Or why don't they have something a bit more interactive or interesting?
That's a big missed opportunity.
That's a massive
Yeah.
because if they don't need to do it physically, they could test out, because the booth has either gotten a bit stale, and there's only so much you can do with the amount of space that you get and the rules that are in place. I mean, there's still plenty of unexplored ideas, but if you changed anything to it, or if you did more virtual things, I think you could actually see a lot more. It would be a good time to experiment with the rules, I think, because it's not so important.
I guess they're trying to keep it, more fair to the previous years. So they don't want to change too much, otherwise it'll just become a different competition at this point.
Yeah, and also since the world's regulations remain unchanged on this subject, it means that if teams don't have to design it within the same constraints, their design focus will be very different for nationals and states compared to what they have to do for worlds, which could impact how well the competition does there.
And REA is a big fan of sticking with the same style of rules and presentation of rules as the world competition, because back in 2015, 2016, they redesigned the rules at the world level, and then the later year, the rules, just the way they were presented, followed suit in Australia as well, with the presentation of diagrams with that red car that everyone's so familiar with these days. So yeah, it would be a different competition. I think it's important to consider the consistency in the competition, because if it's not consistent with later competitions, everyone's under a lot of stress with coronavirus, and changing the competition significantly could increase that as well, I think.
I think we might still see some quite drastic changes within the actual design and especially materials of the display, because obviously with the coronavirus, there's going to be a shortage on certain materials. But another thing is the 2-hour time limit. That's something that's always in the back of a team's head on how they can design a display to be built in 2 hours. That is one of the toughest things when designing the booth display. I think it's going to be interesting if we see booths with a much broader range of design.
I think what Michael said earlier is that they're not trying to. I think I disagree with. They're not trying to change. The car doesn't change fundamentally, but if the World Finals change their rules to say the booth has to be of different specification, that it would work well, because then all the countries will it will all trickle down to there. And the cars changed massively in 2012 to 2013, where you couldn't have the wings go all the way up the wheel anymore. So I don't think it's too much of a change to see a booth change specifications as such. I think the thing that would limit it more so is they have all the structures to put up every year, probably stored at Denford. I don't think they'd hire that out. I think they'd probably just ship that across in a shipping crate 6 months before or something like that.
No, they're individually hired.
I think they're hired.
Yeah,
they are. They're definitely hired, in fact.
Because I remember at 2017, was it 2018? They made a mistake with the sizing of the displays, and teams were caught out because their booths were too big. So yeah, they definitely hire it out.
But I remember seeing in a post on Denford Limited some time ago, they had all the booth materials just listed on one thing.
That may be just
for the
shipping
UK.
around the UK, yeah. Because keep in mind, shipping things around the UK is easily, you just stick it on a motorway and you're there in 3 or 4 hours. You know, it's not like Australia where you got to drive between Adelaide and Melbourne, which is like 8 hours or something like that.
Yeah, and there were also the issues with the pit displays at Nationals this year, where they were all different sizes.
I guess just on a different note there with the state and national finals, I think it'll be quite interesting to open it up to all teams. So we've all been in construction of our boots. We've all been limited by not only design restraints but financial restraints at some point in the competition. But I think it'll be interesting to allow all teams essentially what would be an unlimited creativity and financial, or sort of virtual financial situation for them to really do whatever they like within that 2 meter by 1 meter or whatever it is in Australia here, which I think will be quite interesting actually.
One thing I'm interested in is how these sorts of videos are going to work, well, in place of the interviews, because other countries, such as I think Germany's been doing Zoom calls for interviews. I think Ireland is doing the same, but Australia's doing videos pre-recorded for engineering interviews. I think that's giving teams a bit of leeway in what they can, I don't know, because judges aren't going to be able to ask them questions. So they're going to be be able to say whatever they want in order to meet the criteria. How is that going to sort of impact the competition, do we think?
Well, I mean, this is, I'm speaking purely from an engineering perspective, and I'd be interested in everyone else's perspective, but we usually let into the first 5 or 10 minutes, we'd tell them everything we wanted for our interview and all the research that we'd done, and then open it up for questions. So the questions took up 30 minutes of our time. So that's 3/4 of our interview gone. So I think it's going to limit a team's ability to showcase the stuff, because engineers, like, as a judge, I've judged before, it's the way that you find information out about a team is not by what they tell you, it's the questions you can ask them. So I don't think it's going to work too well.
Yeah, from an enterprise standpoint, for my team, we do a very similar thing to what you were describing with spending the first 20 or so minutes of an interview. Like, sometimes we've literally had scripts in the past where we've gone through our booth and gone through all the criteria to explain it to the judges, and it's worked well in the past. But yeah, questions are definitely an essential point, especially for some teams who don't really, like, they struggle a bit. They know the information, but they don't know how to explain it to other people. So yeah.
Yeah. And one I remember back in 2014-15 nationals, 2015 nationals, our pit display judging, we did a very short explanation about ideas behind the booth and that kind of thing, and then it was just questions spieled off by the judges. So Jesse, your point about, you know, a lot of it being questions from the judges is because they actually took a real big interest in our pit display, because it looked all right, but the content was there, and they really wanted to dig into why we made the decisions for different things. So just pre-recorded videos, they're going to have to keep in mind that they need to look at the criteria and just say as much to the criteria as they can. And I think the more creative they are in the way they present that, the more they're going to stand out. You know, you could have someone stand there and explain it to the judges on a video, but I think if they do it in a creative manner, and they take on some really creative filmmaking techniques, they could really stand out and influence the judges' opinion on their video, which then flows onto the content they're delivering, if that makes sense.
I think one thing that this will do is that it will really expose the teams that fake information. Because I mean, because one of the things that we'll be discussing in our next episode is how to conduct an interview properly. And a lot of people from a judging perspective go and talk about, oh, we don't have the evidence, or they explain their thinking, but they're kind of just doing it on a whim. I think if you have to actually show evidence in a video form, like you can show your car or your CAD model or stuff like that, and you show all your testing, there's no excuse not to have a testing document or something like that. So teams that have to actually do, it's a way of assuring the teams actually do the work.
I think one thing that cool that we could see for evidence is actually seeing the car during its testing and having a pre-record, like almost a testing montage, because normally you'll see teams walk into engineering interviews and they've got the portfolio, they can see photos of their testing, and they may have testing models, they may have other pieces of equipment, but it might actually be interesting to see teams bring in videos of them actually conducting a different amount of tests, maybe even seeing a car in a smoke tunnel, or perhaps a computer generated image of it on the track or something cool like that.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see if teams could actually show that if it was conducted via Zoom calls, for example, and they were allowed to be at school, if they could actually show the judges how they went through their testing process and show them the track. And yeah, that would be another great way to show evidence that isn't available at physical finals.
And that's a good point. I don't know whether teams record their testing, but I think given what's just been released, if you're doing physical testing on your car and that kind of thing, start video recording it so that you can add that into your video if you're wanting to show that in your video, which you probably should want to. So yeah, I think that might be a good idea to start video recording all your tests. I don't know, was that a common thing that you did in Infinitude, Jesse, or in Evolve, George?
I mean, we videoed most of our tests anyway, just to analyse what was happening, see if anything went wrong, what it was. It wasn't necessarily so we could show people all of our tests, but we recorded them out of habit.
Just so you had a record that you could look back at.
Yeah, or if we needed to just remember what happened in that test or something.
Yeah.
We video recorded out of necessity because we didn't really have many testing methodologies that could test the LERS accurately, apart from just running the car and seeing the impact of it. So we were just forced really to record it. If there wasn't a LERS, I don't think we would have recorded as much of our testing video-wise.
Yeah, because in Infinitude we did pretty extensive research on the LERS, didn't you?
Yep, plenty.
That's why we came second, isn't it?
On the point of interviews, another thing that will probably need to change its format a bit due to the fact that either a video being sent in or no interview at all, how the portfolios are laid out and how much evidence has to go into them. Because if you're not able to physically show the judges some stuff, say you had a manufacturing jig that you didn't put a picture of in your portfolio and you intended to show the judges in the interview, it could both limit portfolio space and make you need to fit more in, I guess.
I think the easy fix for that would just be increase the portfolio size and get rid of the interview.
That would...
Yeah.
Yeah.
No one wants to write a 40-page portfolio, though.
No, I'm not saying 10 pages each book. I'm saying maybe add 3 pages where you can discuss more.
All right.
I don't know about you guys, but when I was writing my stuff for the graphics, and that wasn't especially long, I always felt like I needed more space to explain things.
Yeah.
Maybe it's because I ramble. I have a terrible tendency, as many people have seen on this podcast, to ramble. In fact, I'm doing it right now. But I always felt like more space would have been better. And so I think increasing the portfolio size to get rid of interviews it takes away some of the creativity teams can have with a video. And I think there's big opportunities to be had with teams creating videos. But that again, whether you're going to be able to convey enough information in a video compared to what you could in 3 extra pages in the portfolio. I mean, what do you guys think?
At our World Finals, I believe it was a CJJ or a Vinco, actually had 2 engineering portfolios. So they had one sort of that met the criteria, it met the page limit. And then they actually had an extended version, which I believe was actually close on 30 or 40 pages, that they actually were able to take into their engineering interviews and go right through and have all of their testing and design, manufacture, everything laid out to their heart's content, essentially, and have it all there and documented.
I'm no engineer, but I think the engineers in here can agree that that's a great idea.
That is a brilliant idea. I when we were in Melbourne collaborating with Hyperdrive, they had a very similar book, but their book was immensely sized. Like it was like 120 pages. It was a proper book.
At Worlds, I know Pinnacle did a similar thing.
Our book was probably about like 10 centimeters thick and like 400 pages of just testing data and different iterations of each and every single one of our cars that we had, and then we brought it into the engineering interviews, and we had one for nationals as well.
We did a similar thing for nationals as well that I know Peter saw at least, and it was very thick because we copied Pinnacle.
The one thing that engineers don't like is waffle.
Yes.
Yeah,
we get told off in all our reports if we have a sentence that's not there. It's not English. We don't do English at university, but if we have one sentence that isn't there, it gets pulled up very quickly. So engineers aren't willing to read heaps of stuff. And also part of your job as an engineer is to summarize your test findings. So maybe putting 40 pages of spreadsheet data isn't going to be very useful. But if you've got a summary of all that data on, say, 5 or 6 pages, and then you can explain a bit more behind your choices, I think that would be a lot more useful. And having maybe an auxiliary document would be useful, but not...
Yeah, don't discount the importance of an appendix in these documents. You can appendicize all of these spreadsheets and stuff so that, you can have your summary, but if the judges, for whatever reason, want to go and have a look at the raw data or they have questions about it. I know in our subs engineering interview, they certainly were interested in the mechanics of a spreadsheet I designed to calculate our buoyancy. Our subs and schools engineering interview, I should specify that if I didn't. And so maybe having a large size appendix for your summary of all of your findings so that, it's properly organized.
Yeah, so in this booklet that we did for nationals, what we did was we had one part of it which was literally 120 pages of each of our different, like our car through all its concepts and revisions, and it had a screenshot of that car in CAD and a flow simulation underneath it showing its drag coefficient and the like, so we could actually show how we improved our car quantitatively. And then at the end of all these 120 pages, we had one summary page, and throughout we had sticky flags showing all the different key changes to our car. And that was really useful. The judges really liked that.
We had something similar. We had it divided based on which type of testing it was. So we had like the testing of the physical car itself where we actually ran it down the track. Then we had virtual and then flow sim and wheel and axle testing as well. And I think even though it is like a lot of data, what we did the beginning where we did 20 minutes of just this is what our car is about, and then add the questions, and those were used as supplemental information to answer the questions. It's better to have it than not.
And George, you did a lot of testing with your wheel systems. Did you guys produce anything like this in Evolve?
We didn't produce anything particular for the World Finals to document our data. I mean, we had it all on our computer. I think when we went into our engineering presentation, we had the spreadsheet open as a file, but I don't think we ever actually got around to showing it.
Right.
But we didn't present it neatly and nicely in the way that other teams have done.
Do you think? I mean, obviously you won, but do you think that would have helped more? How much value do you see in this?
I mean, I see it, but I definitely see a value in being able to go, here definitely is our data. But I mean, in our portfolio, we did quite a lot of work showing evidence of our testing. And I think Jesse's right that engineers don't want to have to, especially when you're judging the competition, you don't want to have to go through it. You don't necessarily want to go through hundreds of pages of just data going, this is it, this is what we did, this is what we did. I think summarizing is important.
We are getting onto a topic that we're going to be discussing in our next episode of our podcast.
You can say next episode, but it's probably going to be released after.
Well, another episode of our podcast.
An episode.
An episode coming in the future.
An episode. It's a vowel, guys. It's and before vowel. Thank you very much.
Okay. Anyway, where we're going to discuss that one, if you lie, judges will ask for your credibility. But if you don't lie, like if judges believe you, they won't question your credibility, and then you probably don't need the documents like that. The documents that, like the supplementary documents, are only really there to prove that you've actually done stuff that you're talking about, in my opinion, and that would be my use of having the document. So there's a lot of teams that come in and say they've done stuff but haven't got the substance behind it, and as a judge, you're just instantly thinking they're not done that. Let's question them, and then it can easily fall apart.
Another thing, I don't know if we've discussed it yet. I could have just been blanking out for the entire podcast. That's a possibility. An issue with the virtual finals, car breakages. Got that written down.
What's happening with the racing to begin with?
So with the racing, the Australian regulations have said that they're looking at doing an in-person event for the racing, but that's subject to availability. So they actually haven't released much about how they're going to manage that yet.
So in the UK, what they've said is that each car will only be raced once. So for the national finals, you send 2 cars in, and each car one car goes in lane A, one car goes in lane B. And that's because they basically can't deal with any cars braking. So, I mean, that's one, I think, problem of the virtual final, in that you may just be unlucky and get 2 bad canisters.
So there wouldn't be a Grand Prix time? Like, would they calculate an average of both times, or would it just be your net lap? Your fastest net time?
It would be your fastest. They might do a mean of your 2 times. But
yeah, because I'm just thinking that since they calculate like Grand Prix from your 6 middle runs usually.
I don't think they do Grand Prix.
We don't do Grand Prix time.
Oh, okay.
And I'm assuming they're going to just scrap reactions.
That would be
most likely.
It's the most practical thing to do at this point.
Yeah.
Back on the topic of, just quickly, we found that there was a variation that to get rid of a bad error, we had to race 14 times for a appropriate approximation of what our car's performance would be. So if you're racing once with each car, your percentage of error is just so exponentially high. I think there'd almost be no point of producing a car at that point.
Well, I mean, what we did for our regionals that were virtual, we just didn't race at all. We only submitted cars, and then they were scrutineered, and that was your car points. You had no racing just because you didn't want to risk anything.
Okay.
Wow. Okay.
Another area of focus for teams could be to really up their communication with mentors, especially ex-World Finals mentors, because we've sat through those engineering and marketing, etc. interviews and have seen the styles of questions that are thrown at us. Clearly, with the Australian regulations, you're not allowed that question time, at least at this point in time. But through engaging with your mentors, you may be able to find and identify those questions and then preemptively answer those in your video that you submit.
I guess one question would be, if all the listeners on the podcast could get in contact with us and ask if they'd want some help on how to prepare videos. But I think what Corey, I think on Corey's point,
well, I guess, and on that, it may actually bring out a bit of an inequity with schools that haven't competed before versus schools with long history. So your Brightons, your Trinity Grammars, etc., who have quite a long list of potential contacts that they can get just through their school alone without even having to go external.
That would certainly put a lot of newer teams far behind.
I think a positive mindset towards the videos is a key starting point. You know, I was a big fan of Casey Neistat in the Infinitude era, and Casey Neistat's philosophy on video making is that you just need a camera to get started. It doesn't matter how bad quality that camera is. You know, you just need to have a camera and just start making videos. So even if you don't have the best equipment, you can still apply filmmaking techniques, even if it's not going to be the best video quality. It needs to be 1080p if you're doing it for the Australian finals. So you need to have like that minimum benchmark. But as long as you can submit a 1080 video, then you just need to research maybe some basic filmmaking techniques and that kind of thing, so that you can produce something that looks at least semi-professional.
This might be a point for a different podcast, but could the introduction of videos bring a new side to the competition in total? Like, because if you think about it, Formula One's a massive production. They spend a lot of money broadcasting it around the world, and they've got a lot of that's because it currently doesn't really cater too much for the video. Like, if you did more video stuff, would that make it like a new marking criteria, and you could potentially turn that into a proper you make a team video that's actually, it follows a criteria or a challenge or something like that. So it's more a broadcasting kind of thing, because one of the most important things about Formula One is its broadcast.
Yeah.
One thing with the video, I think would be cool. On Cameo, there's a Formula One driver called Juan Pablo Montoya, number one Juan. If some teams manage to pay him to get a cameo on their video, that'd be pretty cool. I haven't seen an actual Formula One driver in F1 schools.
Probably costly, but would be cool.
$50.
So it would actually make F1 in schools pay to win.
Exactly. Fantastic idea.
Oh man.
Like F1 in schools isn't already pay to win, let's be real.
I mean, but you still got to be pretty good at getting sponsorship.
Anyway, another way that you could probably make your videos professional is the Australian rules no longer require a team uniform. However, that being said, a team uniform would show good team identity, consistent branding, and if you wear it in the videos, it's just going to be so much better. If we release a video episode of this podcast, you'll see that 3 of the hosts are wearing our Off the Track shirts. Yeah, so key team branding is key. Okay, it's certainly one of the common marking criteria across the F1 in schools competition. So just keep that in mind. It's not required, but I would imagine that you would look more professional if you had one.
I personally would design one anyways, because like Michael said, it does show good team spirit. It's another marketing thing. It's something you can write about in the portfolio. It's content. I recommend doing it. Plus, half my wardrobe is now F1 schools merch related stuff. And I never have to buy a shirt again in my life.
Another point with that, though, is that the regulations do say that that you should design a team uniform to put in the portfolio, even if you don't manufacture one.
Yeah, I mean, even say here in Australia, where we're starting to see the relaxation of some of the social distancing and isolation rules, it would also help as teams are able to start getting out into the business environment after chasing sponsors to have that team uniform. It's a much better look than go in asking for sponsorship, I believe.
My question would be, sorry, this is slightly sidetracked, but it's on the topic of uniforms. Because there's no physical presence, sponsors are getting less return on investment already, right? And if you're not going to produce a shirt, you've lost sponsorship space and stuff like that. As is if you're not producing a booth, and physical items have a lot more impact than like digital items. So I guess would you have to kind of, is there even really a point in, I guess, creating marketing, from a business perspective, is there a point in sponsoring if you're not really going to get any exposure and you just kind of, I don't know.
Well, I think we'll see a much greater shift towards a lot of increased amount of digital ROI in this season. Clearly, physical branding is a little bit more hard to achieve, especially across the world. But I guess teams will just have to work that out with their sponsors and make sure that they're happy with the packages that they're putting forward.
There would have to be a lot more emphasis on just digital marketing through social media in general, which is achievable, although not easy.
And that's another thing that you can consider is, Ben, you said you put social media statistics in your prospectus and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Maybe a bigger emphasis on your social media presence in your prospectus would be a good way to go on that one.
I think there might be a larger influence of the team website and team social media, because although it's present at the competition, I mean, it's not really talked about as much at the competition that I think it should be. So I think with the reduction in the amount of things that teams can put forward in person, we'll see a lot greater presence of those online marketing tools such as the website and social media.
I think the website should be a part of the criteria because it's recognised at Worlds as an award. So why shouldn't it be part of the criteria? And especially in this day and age, all the teams have websites at Worlds anyway. So why, just make it part of the criteria and assess it.
Yeah.
So obviously, as you've heard, there's a lot of issues with virtual finals. There's going to be so many changes to how the competition takes place. Hopefully we've kind of covered everything that you'd want to hear. But for the meantime, thanks for listening to us. Thanks for the 1,000 listens we just recently passed. Great milestone.
Huge milestone, yeah.
Good job, guys. We can stop. You can go home.
Yeah.
Yep, that's it. That's the end of the Off the Track podcast. We reached that milestone. No more, guys.
All of your support. I don't think any of us could have imagined it would get this big when we started this. When? September last year?
Yeah, then.
Has it been that long?
Yeah.
Jeez.
This episode was published 6 months ago.
I think all of us wanted to really kind of do this, but we never thought that actually people would want to listen to us carry on for a year.
No, yeah. Well, thank you for listening to Off the Track. You can listen to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts. If you enjoyed this episode, you can rate the show on Apple Podcasts because it really helps, apparently. Make sure to follow us on Instagram at Off the Track Podcast. You can visit us at offthetrack.net.